Great. Tony, thank you for inviting me to come on board the bus. I like the bus that you've built and that we've built and co-created together. It's felt intimate, alive, real. I've been feeling your heart kind of drive this bus in a good way. And these kind of energies start from the top down. And we've all been experiencing that together. And I think we're gonna continue to see this bus go through its tour and get a lot of steam and get a lot of excitement. We're gonna have baby buses and get this
And those babies are going to
large. Yeah. Big buses, little buses,
Boats,
we
cruises,
take all kinds of buses.
airplanes,
No boats. Buses in the air, buses on the water.
flying buses.
Amphibious buses.
And Chuck, thank you so much for encouraging me to get in that cold ass fucking tub. Because I don't think I would have done it without you. And so today we're going to talk about flow, and I'm going to just weave in some of the comments that you made, Giordana, about the neurobiology of flow, different access points, talk a little bit about medicine work, which Harry started to bring into the discussion. My background is in both neurocognitive restoration, integrative psychiatry, and the kind of the allopathic MD world, and also psychedelic research, plant medicine-based investigations, and time in the jungle for long periods of time, studying really beautiful traditional medicine ways with the curanderos and curanderas down there. And so now we have the opportunity to bring some of this together. When we really buoy up neurobiology, neuroanatomy, neurophysiology, we bring down the consciousness technologies to help us have that state change. Just like Einstein said, we can't solve a problem using the same mindset that created it. We need a state change, and we need a new access point, a new reference point, and a way to be able to look at what are the things that caused us to be in a particular state. From the psychiatric arena of suffering, that looks like oftentimes the big five: addiction, post-traumatic stress disorder, chronic severe depression, anxiety, and end-of-life transition, challenges, fear. Right? 85 or so, plus minus percent, of all our healthcare dollars are spent in the last 9 months of people's lives. Because we as a culture have this huge fear around death. And this real desire to grasp onto these last few days and moments that might be pretty freaking uncomfortable because some of the technologies that we have for curing chronic illness aren't readily available. And that's a whole level of bureaucracy and politics we don't necessarily get into. But what we do know is that when we assist people to transition this one precious life with a deeper sense of belonging and sufficiency, these are the two big lacks that drive those primary five. We are in a constant state of disconnection, generally, as a populace, as a culture, with a lack of sufficiency. So we try and consume. Sufficiency is essentially the feeling like I am enough, and my life is enough, and I am integrated in this sense of already being filled and fulfilled in my life. And because I'm filled up from within, I don't need to as much try and get something from the outside to fill me up. And so when these things start to be released and resolved, then there's less of the things that tend to bind us in this chronic states of suffering that we find ourselves in. So I enjoy being an advocate for the right use of plant medicines and psychedelic research to help stimulate this renaissance that we're going to experience in the entire field of psychiatry. MDMA and psilocybin going into phase 3 trials, likely in the next 3 years being prescriptive ready for trained clinicians, which is... And I'll talk a little bit about the research just so that you guys have the information. But we'll keep it mostly around flow. So that's a long-winded introduction into the variety of ways that we can use our time here. And I also want to be respectful of our time because we've had a full day. And I could riff on this for a week. So we'll just keep it to the skinny. So I'd love to speak today about flow. What are the qualities of it? What are the benefits? how can we access the greatest experience and benefit of flow, and what I call practices of flow plus? How do we up-level the quality of flow just by itself? And then what are good practices? And we've already kind of been in the game of the practices. We'll go with the qualities first. We've already been talking about qualities of flow. You mentioned sense of time dilation, or time, what I just think as timelessness. Many people in the float tank might have 2 hours go by and it feels like 5 or 10 minutes. And for me, it was the opposite in the cold plunge. It was like 90 seconds and it felt like, 90 years. And 90 million needles. But it was so freaking good. And so there's a sense of time, expansion, contraction, fluidity. There's a sense of presence, like you mentioned as well. And the ability to drop into presence, which means the release from the past and the release from the future, locked into this present moment with a sense of exclusivity as well. So there's absorption in the moment. There's not just presence in the moment, there's absorption in the moment to the exclusion of other things. We're so locked into our target. Now, flow can be a fairly active peak state or ecstatic state, which is more of a yang kind of experience. And it could also be more relaxed, passive, you could describe it, particularly because I think of flotation as being a great flow practice. And it's a bit more of a yin-based practice. And we can talk about the variety of different ways to access flow, but still the same qualities are pretty consistent. Presence, time expansion, and a sense of pleasure. There's a Moorish kind of quality, otherwise we would keep opting back into the system. So it does have that autotelic kind of experience. It is juice and beneficial just for itself. And so what are the benefits? I think of the benefits on 4 levels: body, mind, heart, and soul. On the body level, physiologically, all systems are leveled, upregulated, optimized. The hormones start to optimize. The inflammatory markers start to normalize. We start to see chronic inflammatory conditions spontaneously get better over time. And there's a lot of different thoughts and beliefs as to why that is. We'll just stick with the summary statement for now. So physiology starts to optimize, and then through that physiologic optimization, we see the system start to youth again. Like we're getting slipped back in and plugged back into the motherboard. Like where vital life force energy gets received from our environmental activities or internal activities, because we've had some good discussions, Peter, about meditation and the ways that we can access divine, or maybe not even from a spiritual perspective, but life force interconnectivity that is our remembering that we are all part of the same divine, there's that word again, the same spark of life. When I start thinking about like energetic esoterics, I personally have a relationship to an experience of divinity, but we can also take it outside of the spiritual context and just talk about life force itself. So when we consistently access experiences of flow, life force energy is naturally refilling our cup, which oftentimes does tend to run low because of the way we live our lives. I like that marathon analogy. It's this like slow burn that most people are just so normalized to, we don't really even recognize that it's there. But it's like the frog boiling slowly over time that won't jump out because it's just kind of normalized, and it's like goes to sleep and then it's lunch. So we're not going to do that. We're going to opt out of the tank or get in the cold tank and have a state change and consistently get reintegrated in flow practices because we know they are vitalizing, they're youthing, and when the juice comes back online, we start to feel our vitality and our sex and our fertility and our virility, which is no small issue. Because we are consistently seeing, particularly for men, it's a little easier to see because sperm is a little easier to test than eggs from ovaries. But for men, sperm count is consistently, in average men, going down, down, down. Sperm motility, sperm function is going down, down, down. And more people are needing to resort to in vitro fertilization and exogenous means or outside means of stimulating fertility and virility. So when we're just talking about the body benefits, there's a lot here in flow. And then we drop into body-mind. And essentially we're going into more subtle planes. Body, mind, heart, and soul. Mind aspects. What happens with the mind in flow states is we get this experience of being a little bit detached, and you mentioned this earlier, from our egos, or that sense of self. The idea of self can be on multiple levels, but the box that we put ourselves in, because of programming and belief structures and many things from this life and transgenerational patterns, because mom's stuff and dad's stuff interweaves to create hair color, eye color, and belief systems and trauma fields. Those things are energetic patterns that get brought in. So when we tap into the system of flow, we recognize that, and again, I'll bring back in the potential to use medicines or state-changing catalysts, because they work very efficiently and effectively, to recognize that those things that I thought I was might not have been my conscious choices. I can start to slowly repattern who I actually choose to be. So if I'm engaging something like a flow state that starts to help me see myself in a different way, that now I'm seeing myself as also empowered. Flow states will consistently give us a sense of empowerment because we're consciously choosing something that feels good with benefit, and I don't see much of a downside. And sometimes there are things that push us, they challenge us. So when we engage consciously into a challenging experience that has reward, we're starting to feel more and more of our personal power be reclaimed. So an ego-less experience, or an ego-relaxed experience that's empowered and unifying. And what I mean by unifying is that we are consistently, the ego itself is made up of many different parts. There's a whole kind of science of the psychology and the science of parts work. When we understand what are the different parts that make us who we are. And people that have a more unified experience of who they are have recognized that these different parts are all playing. Like a symphony is all playing. Right? And you can get people who are rocking out horns and bells and drums and out of tune, and it sounds like chaos. Or you can have a singular conductor organizing higher self identity that's bringing everybody into unison. And it's not saying anybody is wrong, nobody in the orchestra is better than anybody else. We just need to find a way for everybody to speak and sing and create beauty together. And so that's another thing that flow states consistently do. We see people who are engaging in flow states in a mindful way for self-development become unified and more unified in who they recognize themselves to be in the world and who they choose to present themselves to the world. Body, mind, heart. In flow states, the feeling itself, like when we were all sitting down after the tub experience, I just remember how that felt, not what we were talking about, but like the feeling state of it. Easier, more peaceful, more just relaxed. De-armored is what I like to think about flow states creating. Particularly when we do that together, we're more connected because we share this new novel experience together. So when we're de-armored, there's more of our heart and feeling state and engagement that's available. I'm more available for connection. I've rested a lot of my busyness in doing this. I've had this experience that brought me into presence, and I've shared that with you, and now I'm more available to see what now wants to happen. More available to experience my heart in connection with another person, or even in connection with myself, or even to be present with something that doesn't feel necessarily good. But that now I'm more aware because I'm less armored and I'm more in contact with that feeling state. And then through that level of availability, I'm oftentimes more generous. I'm more generous. I have that sense of being filled up, so there's more of me that's ready to give back. Heart, soul. The soul is a bit of the subtle energetics in the sense of below our thoughts and below our feelings, of kind of like who we are in our body, in this life, in this present moment. And there's a consistent unifying kind of summation when those things, body, mind, and heart, have been locked into place. There's a sense of fulfillment that comes. There's a sense of rightness. You and I were using that word before. A rightness of where I am in my life right now. And if we did describe it with a little bit more spiritual context, maybe it's a bit of an orchestration. Like I've been orchestrated at this moment. Everything that's been in my life leading me up to this moment, to put me here, to offer me this opportunity to be fully engaged in what can be experienced. Not that what I can get, but what I can give and what I can share and who I can receive from. So that sense of fulfillment and that sense of rightness and a sense of peace that is not a mentalization. The Taoists speak about the decisions or the thoughts that make themselves, the actions that make themselves. There's a sense of naturalness and a natural doingness. So we engage the practice of flow because all of these things consistently, and the research shows this, that what happens on the body, mind, heart, and soul, generally many of the things that I'm speaking about feel like Moorish kind of qualities. I want to have more of this because it's feeling really good. And so when all of this happens, we can recognize that there are ways to opt into the system with a few just nuances that up-level that experience even further. And I call those flow plus qualities. And kind of like, this is really good, but we could add a little cherry or a little sprinkles to make it a little bit more pretty. And there are 4 of those as well. The first is to create community around it, which you have beautifully done. We can experience flow on our own, and yet how much better does it get when we share the experience with our friends and we make new friends, particularly if we have these new novel experiences, because there's nothing quite like bonding around a new novel experience. And again, I'll bring it back to psychedelic medicine research and experience. I lived in the jungle for about a year. After I had done all my medical training, residency, 2 fellowships, I had had a clinic in integrative psychiatry for about 3 years, and I went through a divorce, and I couldn't feel it. I couldn't feel any of it. And I was like, I know it's there. And I know it would be really good if I could tap into it, but I am off wall. And so I was wrestling with this for a while, and I was in a men's group when we were going to a lot of sweat lodges, and I was like beating that drum and singing that prayer and calling in something to help like obliterate or at least just take it down a notch, this armored shell. And not too long after that, one of my best friends, who was a naturopath at the time, he said, I think there's an experience you might be interested in. And I was at that point, I was raw vegan. I was studying Theravada Buddhism. I had taken the monastic precepts. I was like super clean and fairly rigid. And he says it creates altered states, and I don't want to interfere with any of your agreements, and I said, I need some help, and I trust you. And it was my first ayahuasca experience. And in 3 days, actually I think it was 3 days, it was only 2 ceremonies. Well, only. Only in those 2 ceremonies, I learned more about myself than I had in a whole decade of psychotherapy. And I was like, holy shit, where has this been? Why haven't I heard? I've studied all this formal medical training in psychiatry and psychology and the mind, and I've never heard anything about this. I've never had any experience like this. I'd been addicted to pot for 4 or 5 years, and pot helped me open up my mind and creativity, but I also got really dependent on that numbing effect from this like emotional pain. And my experience with ayahuasca just opened that completely. So in fairly short order, I closed my clinic. I wasn't quite ready for the jungle, so I went and moved into an ashram for almost about 2 years, just cleaning house before I moved down to the jungle. And those experiences in the jungle helped to... it's certainly a flow state. It's certainly a change of consciousness. It's certainly a different kind of perspective on yourself in relationship to the story. We all create these stories about ourselves, largely that are fabricated out of survival and the ego trying to keep us clear and protected around threats or ways that we weren't loved just right. And what I consistently noticed is so much of the healing that happened in the space was what happened individually and what was shared collectively. In the circles, in the sharing integration times, and in the depth of people's experience with one another, particularly in new, challenging, death-defying experiences. There's a great book called The Island by Aldous Huxley. I highly recommend if you haven't read it. And he describes the building of the new culture. What would it look like to build like the idyllic culture? And one of those aspects is the rites of passage ceremonies for the youth going from childhood to adulthood who have the shared experience with climbing a mountain face, like literally getting on the edge of a death-defying experience, unifying their community, and then going through another shared experience of the ego death, which is with the consumption of something called moksha medicine, which is likely psilocybin. And doing that with the shepherd guardianship of the tribal elders in the council. And so the community aspect is a way to up-level flow. Another way to do that is with an orientation to do it for healing. And so that, again, is much of the medicine work. So like the Buddha said, use the medicines that are available to us. And that includes targeted supplementation. It includes medical cannabis. It includes whatever we are looking at, the buffet of options, and choose to orient and ideally have a guided experience if it's going to be a transcendent one, so that we know it's going to be held safe. At minimum, it's going to be safe, and the medicine does the work. At times, it needs to be facilitated and supported. And to honor it as a healing process that has an arc of preparation, experience, and integration. I appreciated what you said, Tony, about the peak experiences that have the natural valley on the other side. Right? That is the ebb to our flow state that really deserves to have some integration time. And so when we do it collectively and socially, and we do it with healing, we can also up-level the experience by bringing in an aspect of sacredness or divinity or unification with the source of all that is and with one another. I've met really sweet brothers and sisters who have described themselves to me as atheists or agnostics, and yet they live some of the most spiritually oriented lives because they live in a very communal, giving, generous, loving way. So however we verbalize and systematize our belief around interconnectivity, that's what I'm speaking about. a sense of doing that, not only from the social aspect, but from the remembering that not only are we connected to each other, we're connected to everything on this beautiful blue planet that we call home. We are interwoven with all the trees, all the bugs, all the creatures, everything in the ocean, everything in the air. We are all made from the same cosmic dust, and we have to understand that we are significantly changing the landscape of our collective home in ways that might be hard to repair in the near future. And these experiences with flow and with medicine work, they're very interwoven, remind us of that sense of interconnectivity. So those are ways to increase and up-level the flow state. And then the practices, we've been in the midst of them all day, right? So for me, there are some not necessarily unique, but there are some consistencies that work for me, and I'll just share those. Bare it. Right? So what I mean by that is get your bare skin on the bare earth and reconnect. And there's a whole science around earthing technology that's really quite impressive. This guy, Clint Ober, spent a decade and $1 million on earthing technology and research before he ever brought it online because he wanted to be able to have the data so the medical industry wouldn't call bullshit on it. So getting our bare skin on the bare earth. Bare it, move it. So like whatever the movement practices are, yoga, for me it's dance. And for me it's dancing blinded. And so that looks like either a blindfold. And so we, at one of the centers and homes that I was living and working at in Sedona, we would do blindfolded ecstatic dances, trance dances. And it's awesome to have 30 people blindfolded, rocking out and going for it. And you have a few people just kind of holding space and somebody's not doing the sprinkler and whack somebody else. But just to keep the safety net, but then come back out on the other side because that is a flow state. That's a transcendent state. That's like holotropic breath work, another practice that we can access. Breathe it is another. Bear it, breathe it, move it, dance it. We have certain physical experiences of physiologic flow integration that can be sober and yet still transcendent. They typically take a little bit more effort in the organization of it, but not once you get the practice. You're like, geez, I don't want to look super weird at ecstatic. And my lady and I just went to ecstatic dance last night. It was so good, and I hadn't danced in so long. And I didn't want to get all goofy with, I'm the only one blindfolded, and everybody's like, what's going on with that guy?
Doing the sprinkler,
because that was definitely happening. But I could rock it out and just close my eyes and forget everybody else is there and drop into that just crystalline grid that's my central column, completely connected to the music in a very sober state. And so we get to just move that, and it felt so good, and I was so tired, and I was like, yes, more. Slept so good. Dance it, breathe it, bring it, bring that. And the last piece is create it. Bring something new. Bring something spontaneous. And I'm saying this at least as much for me as not for you, because this is a big reminder. I get into patterns that I'm kind of consistent in the things that I do. And when I do something spontaneous and I create something new, I haven't done it very often, but when I do it, I'm like, that's freaking cool. Where'd that come from? How did that get moved through? I didn't even so that could be songs, music, rituals, ceremonies, whatever it is that's creating something new that wasn't there before. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you can point at. Maybe it's a song or some kind of riff or, karaoke or open mic night. Getting into that spontaneity of our own creative potential. So we could spend a lot more time unhashing a lot of these concepts, but what I wanted to do is just wanted to pepper out some of the generalizations that I've seen in my own experience, my own clinical practice, working with friends, family, clients of a variety of different shapes, sizes, and forms in a variety of different places, comes down to like many of these summary statements about flow. And thanks for your attention. Thanks for the awesome day. Again, thanks for bringing me here. Happy to stay and answer any questions if you guys have them. Ayahuasca. Great. Oh, this is getting better.
Sorry for the ignorance, I have no idea.
Yeah, this is a great question, and I appreciate when Scott asked Harry, "What's endogenous?" You know, I'm just so in that. Sometimes I forget that there is a whole discussion around the psychedelic medicines, the entheogenic medicines, the medicines that create altered states of consciousness, typically towards a transcendent experience. And there are synthetics, and there are natural medicines. I'm mostly, in my own experience, connected to the natural medicines. I know the clinical research, and I have experience in the synthetics as well, and they both have their place. The natural medicines are the ones that Mother Earth created all by themselves. And they go back in our cultural lore and history as far back as any recorded civilizations do. There's documented accounts of us exploring what's available in nature and consistently returning to the medicines that help us reach a transcendence. And soma is one of the first ones that was described in the Vedic texts. And we're not exactly sure what that was, but it's likely that it was either a mushroom, psilocybin, fly agaric, potentially cannabis, maybe even ephedra or some kind of stimulant that was getting us into hyperactivated states. And there is a medicine that comes from the Amazon River Basin that's the confluence between Brazil, Colombia, and Peru. The only known naturally occurring the two ingredients are naturally occurring, and then man or woman, both, combine these two. And the likelihood that that was going to happen spontaneously, without like some kind of guidance or intuition, is like 1 in a trillion. Not very. And so there's a lot of ideas and lore about where that knowledge came from. Suffice to say, ayahuasca as the medicine is the combination of two plants. One is the vine, the ayahuasca vine, and one is the leaf, the chacruna leaf. And the vine itself works as an enzyme inhibitor to allow the leaf, its DMT, to be orally active in the system. DMT is a psychoactive molecule that's in all life forms and likely in all cells. And a good bit of the early research from a guy named Rick Strassman, DMT, the spirit molecule that you can see as a documentary on Netflix, shows that we release endogenously from within DMT at the time that we're born, in the time of ecstasis and ecstatic states, and the time that we die. And so it's something that's natural, and yet the federal government decided to put it in Schedule 1 in the 70s because the Nixon administration was freaking out that they were going to lose the next election because people were waking up and they were doing stupid shit. And nobody liked it. So they put everything, including cannabis, and nothing in Schedule 1 that is a medicinal psychedelic deserves to be in Schedule 1 because Schedule 1 means there's no known medical benefit and it's highly addictive. So ayahuasca goes back, we don't yet really know its first inception point, but it goes back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, many generations, and it is embedded into that entire area as their go-to medicine for things both physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And it works as a purgative. So when you consume it, the DMT experience of the visionary state comes on, and it works to move things out of the system. So classically, it causes a lot of people to throw up. You can also purge from below. You can cry it out, shake it out, laugh it out. It's a way to move stuck energy in the system. And the curanderos and the curanderas can see, it's totally pitch black, and yet they can see exactly your energy imprint and know where to sing that song or where to bring energy in.
Those are the shaman, right? The
Yeah.
shaman. Good.
Yeah, the medicine men and women. And so this medicine is legal in the States, in the Santo Daime church. Just like peyote is legal in the Native American church. But you have to be church affiliated. Unfortunately, it's not available to the masses. There are other countries, and I consult with ayahuasca centers globally, mostly in Central and South America. And there, it's either recognizing cultural heritage and legal, or you can use it in this kind of gray area zone in legality for life-saving measures, like addiction recovery. And it is consistently been shown to, across the life spectrum, improve quality of life. So for the kids, kids and adolescents are born into the ceremony, essentially. And those that are consistently engaged in the practice of experiencing ayahuasca are more self-aware, self-developed, less anxiety, less depression, less addiction. They grow up to be more self-integrated humans, and therefore less likely to be afflicted by the things that we experience as a culture that are the classic 5 psychiatric conditions that I mentioned. So that's on the front side, and on the back side helps cure chronic illness because it's mostly a mental and emotional clearing. Right? The body and the mind hold all of this energetic residue that the body expresses as symptoms. And it helps with the recognition that there is a sense of interconnectivity. So upon my release of this one precious life in this body, I just simply go back to the experience of being a part of the source. And so there's less of that resistance, and there's less of the co-opted fear that we have collectively with the medical industry to make these really expensive medications that are going to consistently challenge our financial state as a union. So I could speak about, obviously, ayahuasca for a long time. So thanks for asking the question.
Yeah, so for you personally, though, it was a catharsis of stuff that you just didn't know you had and were able to expel and be free of. And
There is life before medicine work, and there's life after medicine work. And it is a very clear demarcation when that experience is held well and facilitated well. And that's why, personally for me, I'm not so excited about the medicines just going blanket legal. I think there's skill in the facilitation. There's ways to make the safe space, preparation, understanding the experience and the integration. And there's levels of medicine work. There's level 1 medicines, level 2 medicines, level 3 medicines. I is more of a level 2 medicine. Level 1 medicines would be like cannabis, low-dose psilocybin, low-dose LSD even. Level 2 medicines are more like peyote, ayahuasca, San Pedro cactus. Level 3 is like ibogaine, iboga, strong medicine, lasts a long time, messes with your heart a little bit, so you need to be mindful. And something called 5-MeO-DMT from the Sonora Desert Toad, which rocket ships your ego right out of your body, and it can be super disruptive. So we don't want to create trauma. We want to continue to expose people to the divinity of who they are.
So for your patients, do you start them on level 1 and then build them up to level 2?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah.
I typically start with a foundation level 0, which is get in the float tank.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't hold your stuff together in a tank, you're going to have a real hard time holding your stuff together in the ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want you to be in that experience, and I certainly don't want to be helping you in that experience. I do, off the record, I do support people going through these kinds of processes, less and less now so. So we have a network of people that we work with, so I know very clearly who's excellent in that space. Because it can be like psychic surgery. And so you don't necessarily, and we went through med school and residency, and so if I'm in psychic surgery, no offense, but I don't want to work with a med student. I want to work with somebody who knows really what they've been doing. Maybe they've got a med student there that they're teaching. Great, I'm all about that. But I want to make sure that person's going to hold a really clean and clear and strong space. So after somebody's got some floats under their system, and maybe some flows under in their belt too, then, like for example, if I agree, not everybody's ready for an ice bath, but I really appreciated your coaching and your support through that process. And so if somebody's not able to be coached through a process of being really uncomfortable and being able to stay in the zone, then maybe that's somebody that I would want to work with a softer level 1 medicine with, like cannabis. Ketamine is also a level 1 medicine, but it works very differently. It's a dissociative. But something that's going to offer a soft kind of experience of an altered state, and see how that allows them to reference fear and all the stuff that's right behind the curtain of the subconscious, because 85% of what makes us who we are was set before the time we were 4 years old. So most of what makes us who we are, we don't have verbal recall for. So when all that stuff in the closet comes barreling out, how's that person going to respond? And so it can be a really nice way to just prep them through the process. So we typically work with that increasing depth and power of experience. Yeah.
At the risk of making it, just one more question, real short. The flow, eating sensory deprivation,
Yeah. Absolutely amazing. The only thing
I always wanted to try that.
The only thing I'm as excited about as medicine work is the float tank. Because everybody can do it at any point. No contraindications, no risk, no downside, only benefit.
Except for that movie where...
That wasn't such a great movie, right? It didn't between that and that was not great for the float industry. That set it back 20 years.
I always thought I wanted to try that. I said, okay, they went too far when they went to that part of it.
Yeah.
I thought it was a neat concept that I always thought that was valuable, but when he starts morphing, I'm not buying into that.
Like Jaws in the ocean.
Right. Yeah. What was the shift in the bottom dollar for the surfing industry for the next 2 years after Jaws came out?
Yeah.
How do you compare this actively trying to achieve a state of flow and optimize your state versus the Buddhist concept of acceptance and just accepting things as they are, because they seem to be kind of contradictory in my mind.
Totally. There's one of the Hermetic principles that talks about the law of polarity. And polarity is essentially the recognition that opposites are the same, but they only differ in degree. And for a while I had a hard time getting my mind around what does that mean? And then it was either in that same kind of reading or somebody else helped me recognize it. It's like temperature. Hot and cold are the same. They're both temperature, but they're in opposite points of the spectrum. And I think of the same thing whether we are engaging our effort full will, presently and consciously to improve our self-development, and we are accepting where we are at any given time. They're kind of like two sides of the same coin. And it's kind of like the masculine and the feminine approach. The masculine is going to be the doing, more linear, goal-oriented. The feminine is going to be more of the spiraling, the compassionate, the forgiving, the present, the accepting, recognizing where we are. I think we're always doing the best we can at any given time, given the tools we have, and we could always be doing better. And we could always be doing a shit ton worse. So I'm like, oh, great. Gratitude in the middle for everything that's helped me get to this point, accepting where I am and who I am, that sense of sufficiency. Ultimately, that is such a healing experience to have. I am enough. I mean, that's the best thing we can tell our kids. That they're beautiful not for what they do, but for who they are. And you can't get that enough when you're a kid, and many of us didn't get that enough. right? So there's this constant seeking to validate, seeking to fill, seeking to prove. And how beautiful is it to have that healing through that sense of sufficiency and acceptance, and still recognize that we're on the path of development. And this is a process of engaging our best self and watering that seed of whoever that person wants to be, and whoever that beautiful expression, whatever that beautiful expression can give back. Because oftentimes this is the last piece that we see when we up-level it. And this is one thing that I'll include in that flow plus state, is when we're doing it, we said it for community, for health, for a sense of divinity and connection, and for purpose, and a sense of reciprocity. That we are doing this work for the opportunity to develop ourselves and to give back, to fill up so much that it's just naturally overflowing, and we want to give